forward seems too much. When you feel totally out of touch, hope is seeping out the door. You find yourself curled on the floor. The thoughts swirl round all jumbled and messed. Why is this brain so darkly obsessed? I've secrets I've never confessed. Haven't told a soul I am depressed. A gentle whisper through the pain. Remember, rainbows follow rain. Breathe deeply, hold on tight. Your hope will return, shining bright. Embrace the now, release the past. In forgiveness, peace will last. You matter deeply, you're not alone. Reach out, let your strength be shown.
My returning guest today is David Amerland. He's a writer who's focused on how human behavior is shaped by modern forces, especially technology, and how that shift impacts our health, culture, and stories. After building a career in marketing and publishing several successful business books, David Amerland expanded into the wellness space with Built to Last, a practical guide to health, longevity, and intentional living. The book immediately prior to this was called Intentional. David is now also writing fiction and exploring the emotional and psychological impact of modern life through storytelling. I am thrilled to have David as my returning guest. I know I always learn something new. And this month is Men's Mental Health Month, which is why we're going to talk about his book, Built to Last, and how men can specifically apply it to make things better for them, to become more rounded, to be more vulnerable, to be more open. All the things that help you live a balanced and healthy lifestyle. And so it's awesome to present to you David Amerland. Good
Elaine,
day.
it's such a pleasure to be here, I can tell you.
It is wonderful to have you here, and I cannot think of anyone better to come on and speak to. To me, it's like the whole person. This is Men's Mental Health Month. And as such, I wanted to talk about men's mental health with some men. Okay. When I want to look deeper into anything, David, you are the man I call. Okay. And that's deeper into my own psyche. That's deeper into search. That's deeper into Google Plus. That's deeper into absolutely anything and everything. This, I will try not to embarrass you too much, but I absolutely love your the depths you go to in your subjects and the breadth of what those subjects are. And you never fail to surprise and thrill me with the information that you give us. So, in light of it being Men's Mental Health Month, and very lately, you came out with your new book, Built to Last. I thought, well, here's a marriage made in heaven. It says how to get stronger, healthier, and happier at every stage of life. Now, this is, of course, for everyone, but we're going to tailor our talk somewhat to men because I believe firmly that our mental health really is dependent on our physical health and our emotional health. And I know that you're the one who can speak to all of those things. So let's dive in.
Okay, where to begin from, right? And you're absolutely right. The way we feel and the way we think is absolutely key to the way our body is. And here's the reason for this. Feelings and thoughts tend to be kind of immaterial, insubstantial things. We sort of have an idea, but we can't really see them, can't really grasp them. Our sensation of them tends to be subjective to a large extent. However, nothing can ever arise out of nothing. And the place where we inhabit is our body. And that body has substrata, it has structure, it has cells, and it has networks, and it has neurochemicals, and it has electrotransmitters, it has neurotransmitters. And all those things actually have a physical existence, which is definitely measurable and definitely makes itself felt. And out of the combination of those sensations, we get our feelings primarily. And once we process those feelings, those emotions, we get our thoughts. So if our home, if our body isn't okay, then having the expectation that our feelings will be okay and our thoughts are going to be okay is something which is a really tall order. So we always start with the absolute basics. And there's a saying which goes back almost 2,500 years ago from ancient Greece, where they said a sound mind in a sound body. And we sort of kind of accept it at face value without questioning too deeply. But there's a massive wisdom integrated into that simple observation.
Absolutely.
That's the basis of it.
Yeah. I'm just going to interrupt you here for one thing that a few, I don't know, a few times ago we were talking. You were talking to me and explained that pain changes us completely. And that's absolutely true. And that's what led me when I started reading your book. I was thinking, oh my God, that makes so much sense that our emotions, our feelings, the pain receptors, the dopamine, all of that needs to have some kind of balance with our physical body because you're trying to walk and there's a rock in your shoe. You can't concentrate, you can't carry on a conversation, you can't walk properly because you are focused on that pain from the rock in your shoe. It throws off everything else. And that's a very simplistic example, but it does therefore make sense that in the larger scheme of things, when you take the long view, that only makes sense that all of those parts of us are put together in a way that's balanced, that's functional, that's healthy. And I don't think you can take mental health or physical health or emotional health or even spiritual health and separate them and have you function properly.
Absolutely, we can't. And the sad thing is, and this is an obvious one, and we don't really think about it, we only talk about mental health when things are already bad. We talk about physical health when things begin to go wrong. And when everything's going relatively okay, without being necessarily okay, we tend to ignore it. We tend to think, oh, it's going to work itself out. And it doesn't. I mean, if you were an athlete, for example, you'd have a physiotherapist, and you have a psychotherapist, and you have a coach, and you might have a dietitian. And all those people are there to make sure that when you push your body and mind to the limit in order to increase your performance, then you have to take specific steps to bring your body back down to baseline, to get enough rest, enough refueling, enough repair, and then you have to do the same thing for your mind. And we know that from elite performers. And for the rest of us, we tend to ignore those things. We tend to think, oh, we'll manage, we're okay, because we're not breaking down. By the time we begin to feel that we're breaking down, it's already too late. And this is the thing we need to be aware of. I've discussed this with a friend before who teaches philosophy at one of the universities in Poland. And we were saying that it's taken 6,000 years to make sure that we have a civilization that more or less guarantees your personal physical integrity. You're going to step out of your house, nobody's going to attack you. We have encoded this into law, we have encoded into traditions, we have encoded into moral structures, moral behavior. If by whatever sort of situation you happen to be attacked, somebody will come to your aid because that's the right thing to do in some way within their own capacity. But nobody's going to be left unmoved because it's been encoded in so many different layers for so long. And that's taken 6,000 years. But that's just the outside. Nobody thinks about what's going on inside each person. We think it's okay to yell at somebody because we are full of anger or full of stress, and we externalize it, and we don't think of the impact that will have on somebody else. We are gradually and encouragingly in the 21st century beginning to talk openly about these things, about our feelings, about how we're impacted by the external world, about how our behavior impacts others. So this is the first step. And we need to accelerate things a little bit so it doesn't take another 6,000 years before we get to the stage where we feel that we are responsible for the mental and psychological health of the people around us.
Yeah, please, let's not take another 6,000 years. But to that end, because we're talking about men's mental health,
Yes.
I think for so long you were seeing men having the silent killer, the widow maker, all these heart problems and things because traditionally men don't talk about their feelings. Men don't have emotions
Yeah.
other than anger and satisfaction. Everything else was by the wayside. And it's not something we probably most people think about, but for so many decades, that was always the fear. I think honestly that's why insurance came about, because the head of the household, the breadwinner, was always at risk, and
Mm.
we put him there because men were
Mm.
meant to be silent and strong and like hydro poles. Just be.
You're correct, 100% correct. This is a stereotype that came about gradually, especially in the West, but it's a global phenomenon to some extent, of the strong silent male. And I'm not quite sure how it emerged, but it does us a huge disservice. And if we look in the past, amongst warrior tribes and warrior cultures, males, the strongest warriors, warriors to be, leaders to be, they had a space where they went through rituals to get in touch with their emotions. They went through stages and phases where they bonded and they opened up with their fellow warriors. So it was never in the past, even amongst warrior cultures, the strong silent type. This is one of these stereotypical Western constructs, in my view. Primarily came through popular culture because we like the lone gunman, we like the strong silent male, the Rambo type that comes and restores justice, that kind of thing, which is entertaining for sure, but it feeds into this stereotype, which doesn't actually conform or even represent the way that our internal world actually works. And this is the problem. So if you keep it all in, you isolate yourself, you put yourself under tremendous pressure, you feel victimized, which is where the anger comes from, because you need to somehow turn the tables so you don't live in a sort of perpetually toxic environment inside you due to the stress of feeling a victim. And none of those things actually serve very well in terms of behavior of men. And we're talking about men in this particular context. There is, unfortunately, precious little guidance on how you should behave in a modern world, beyond that you shouldn't yell, you shouldn't lose control of yourself, you shouldn't, all the things you shouldn't do, which we usually translate as being emotional. And yet, if we look at some of the elite soldiers in training, they're very emotional with their brothers, their fellow soldiers. They're very open about this because that's where their strength is. They go on missions where they fear for their lives. their life. They have uncertainty. They have definitely feel high levels of anxiety, high levels of stress, and they're acutely in touch with their emotions. They don't dampen them down. They don't ignore them. They don't not externalize them. They share them, and that's how they actually grow stronger. If we don't address what we feel, then it controls us. And it controls us to the point where we lose control of our general behavior, our executive function is overruled, and then we get into reactive mode, and then basically every decision we make is going to be wrong, and that escalates and escalates until things become really critical. If we acknowledge our emotions, if we are in touch with how we feel, and that's negative as well as positive emotions, then that leads us into a position of strength, because we become aware of our internal world, and that's the first step to actually making decisions that are not primarily ruled by reactive behavior.
It's really interesting because the very nature of elite soldiers and people during the war and that are entrenched in other countries and what have you are so open and sharing with their brethren, with their troop or whatever they call that pack they are in. It'd be interesting to look at why that became a locked cabinet. It's it does not translate when you put the soldier back in day-to-day society. Yes, they share with their brothers at arms, but they don't share with their spouse or their children or their parents, or it's like it is put in a box and it is locked and only can be seen, felt, or discussed with those particular people. And that seems, is that too a Western construct where to go along with the strong, silent male, as much as being an elite soldier? And you discuss like little bits of this in A Sniper's Mind, because yeah, you
That's right.
have to be
Yeah.
fully aware of what's
Yeah.
around you and how you feel about it.
It's an interesting question you bring up. And the problem in that particular context is compound. The first thing is that when you take a soldier from active duty, where he has experienced all kinds of stresses with people like him at the same level, and you put him into civilian life, now there's a communication gap. Things get lost in translation. He speaks a different language. There is no shared culture. So that makes it really difficult to open up. And on top of this very real problem is the perceived problem that everybody sees him as a soldier, with whatever cultural misconceptions that implies. They don't want to see him cry, they don't want to see him break down, they don't want to see him weak, they see him as a hero of some description. So suddenly that person, whether they are aware or not, understands this perception, understands this expectation, and the need to live up to it. So then suddenly they find themselves isolated, alone, unsupported, misunderstood, and on top of that, expected to perform to some kind of different standard. That's a recipe for disaster. It's miscommunication from all sides. It's on us. We have to understand that we all do different roles in different contexts. We can have highly specialized training for that. And once we're out of that context, we're just another human being. And human beings alone are inherently vulnerable. We're not designed for that. We're designed to network, connect, find where we belong, and actually function as a community. And this is where we, especially in the 21st century, where we still have a loneliness epidemic going on, where we still haven't fully understood the importance of supporting and building communities and the standards and values that come with that. This is where we're going wrong at a fundamental level.
It's so sad when we really think about this, because really we're all after the same thing. We want to be connected, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be together. But by, in a way, forcing the military person to put on one suit while they are active, and then to come into a completely different world, like, let's be honest, and try to fit or take off your suit and then try to fit into this world that is, I would think, for all intents and purposes, when you come out of the theater of active duty, everything just seems so mundane, so paltry, not, no import. It's not life and death. And would it be maybe right or on the right track to say that the soup of hormones and dopamine and adrenaline and all of those things that you face on a daily basis when you are serving, not having that in the real world, then forces you to find the real world boring. It's beige, it's cardboard, it's just so lacking. And that, I
It's
think, yeah, boredom, I think, is the most dangerous state to be in.
It's interesting you use the word boredom. And essentially, boredom means lack of stimulus, or certainly a reduction in the stimulus that we receive from the external world. We know for a fact that people serving in any capacity, even if they don't see active duty, because of the constant task-orientated, very disciplined approach they have to things, have a different baseline of arousal in their brain. So when you put them into a problem, their immediate go-to mode is to break it down into tasks and tackle those tasks in a sequence and bring about the outcome that they expect to have. And if they don't get the outcome, they sort of tackle it again and do the same thing. And that essentially is, in a nutshell, the kind of discipline that you get from the military mindset, where the whole thing is that you are a problem solver of some description, and you have to apply that to the problems that you face. We get into the non-military world, and things are a little bit looser. The lack of focus is certainly evident in that you can tackle several things at once. Nothing seems to be of the same priority. It's very hard to prioritize, and nobody seems to be aware of the sequence of things to be done. People do things in a haphazard way.
Yeah.
And certainly when I talk to people who have come out of the military and they're new to civil life, they find it chaotic and they can't understand how people function in that environment. That again is on us. When we bring astronauts down from space, there is a period of decompression where they have to get reintegrated into civil life. Why? Because in space, there's so zero room for error, essentially, and things are done in a very rigorous, systematic, and disciplined way, and that becomes their way of life. And when they come back down to Earth, in order for them to preserve their mental health, they have to get reintegrated gradually. And this is astronauts. They don't have to face active duty. Nobody's shooting at them. They're not shooting at anybody else. So now we take people who potentially have been trained to kill, maybe placed in a situation where they might be killed, and everything that implies: the stress, the chaos they have to deal with, the systems they have to apply, the solutions they have to put in place. And then we bring them to civil life and think, you're out of the war zone, you should be happy. Yes, but they're also changed, and we refuse to acknowledge that. And a lot of the problems we see is because of the refusal of that acknowledgement. They're not exactly the same as the rest of us. They need help in reintegrating. And I use the word help in a very generic sense. They need some systems, they need some assistance, they need some time, they need some kind of structure around all that. And I know there are things they can access, but again, it's like they have to break down first. And I think that's, again, in a realistic situation. We have to have a problem when we could have had a solution that would prevent the problem in the first place.
So technically, there should be a decompression time frame for people that serve. And funny enough, as you were talking, I'm thinking people coming out of jail have something in place. They have halfway houses, and then they're reintegrated somewhat into society, but at least it's something. between the complete structure of the day and evening and night that one finds in jail, and then to be thrown out into the real world. Yeah, no wonder the rate of recidivism is as high as it is, because
That's right.
yeah, there's no rhyme or reason in the real world.
Yeah. In that context, they're institutionalized, which means essentially what? Their brain becomes accustomed to specific patterns of operation, specific stimuli to which it responds, and then suddenly they're placed in an environment where those things go away, where the structure around them that supported them goes away. They're on their own, they're unassisted, they feel cut off, they feel misunderstood. I mean, the situation is very similar. In all these contexts we're discussing, the problem is the same. We fail to acknowledge changes which happen internally because we can't see them, and we only address them when they are expressed externally through usually antisocial behavior or self-harming behavior, the kind of thing.
If we changed even our health approach to being proactive as opposed to reactive, and working on keeping us healthy rather than making us well again, which is where we're at, and adding structure of, I realize it's not as cut and dried as that, but basically having a time period like that of an astronaut, having something that's that in between time that allows to become assimilated into regular life. But I think part of it is we need more structure day to day just for humans, period. Okay, if you look at, I don't know, I don't care, zebras or squirrels or whatever, even the animals have more structure than we do. It, life is not as chaotic as we make it, which is
Yes,
bizarre when
we
you think about it.
apex predators. We have the privilege to function in any environment we choose. And usually any kind of animal has a very specific environment, and that environment creates structure because it has a dynamic. It has seasonal turns. It has times when the food is plenty and times when the food is scarce, and the water sources go in different places. There is a structure which they follow, and that's part of their life, part of their survival. We are planetary dominant species. So we have taken over the planet. We function in any environment almost at will. We can go to the bottom of the sea, we can go to the depths of space, and everywhere in between. And we do that because of the capability of our technology and the power of our brain. At the same time, we fail to grasp, but every time we change environment, we expose ourselves to potential stimuli for which we are not really prepared. And if we go back to the example of the astronauts, for example, they have tremendous training on Earth on how to function in space. They go into isolation chambers. They go into suspended gravity by either falling from the atmosphere in order to simulate weightlessness in space, or living at the bottom of the ocean. So we prepare them rigorously for that environment where they're going to live in for a very short time. We don't take the same kind of preparation for most of us when we change neighborhoods, for example, change countries, and we have culture shock.
Yeah.
That totally unmans us. There is a phenomenon which has been documented of Westerners going to India on an extended holiday and losing their identity, literally. They forget who they are, they forget why they exist. It's a medical phenomenon. So, because the culture shock is so profound.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. The advent of social media, that had to chuck a whole bunch of spanners in the works because none of us had that kind of access to others the way social media made everything so immediate. Now, you and I have had talks before about the good side of social media and just what Google Plus did for us and many other people. On the bad side, it really did come at us so quickly. People
Mm.
didn't realize how detrimental it could be to young minds that are not fully shaped yet, to children that don't have the mental capacity to understand that not everything they see is real. And that's not even counting on adults that are constantly being having the wool pulled over their eyes and getting scammed and hacked and what have you. I guess, again, that's a very human thing. We have the capacity to be tricksters, to be narcissistic, to go after what we want, often at the expense of others. And that too, I think, plays, well, not just men's mental health, but on the side of men's mental health. It has to be a really big thorn in the shoe of people who look at it and immediately feel comparison, feel that they somehow or other are falling short. They don't meet the requirements that they're seeing in front of them. And because men are so silent and supposed to be strong, that has to be a hell of a soup that's going on in men's minds.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought this up. Social media is still new to us, but right now we've had quite a bit of time under our belt to see its effects. And it does a lot of good things. It shrinks the world, it breaks down barriers, gives us access to knowledge, it allows us to network, it allows us to find friends when finding friends is difficult. At the same time, it produces something called context collapse. We find meaning in what we see because of the context it actually takes place in. And social media is fantastic in its ability to take things out of context and present them to us. So we have an emotional response to what we're seeing, but lacking context, we don't understand the meaning of it. So we end up reacting emotionally to the stimulus without truly being able to prioritize that for us, without being able to understand what it truly means for us, without having the luxury of time to process it and understand its impact on us at a deep level, at the level of memories and knowledge and comprehension. And that's the danger of that. Every time we are exposed to any kind of danger, we find ways to get around it. It takes time, and we are still young in our use of social media in that regard. But as we are talking, we are probably the last of a generation that is growing up without having access to social media. And the
Yeah.
ones coming after us and the ones after them will evolve their own tactics and their own defenses in order to reap the benefits of what they use and mitigate a lot of its bad impact. At the moment, the impact is certainly there. It creates a lot of anxiety in young men. It creates a lot of confusion in adolescents. Definitely the comparison factor is one of the issues which you mentioned. But those existed before in a smaller form, before we reached the digital domain, and this has only amplified it. So in the past, we found ways to guide people through that. And I'm sure that through the next 5 years, as we evolve, we'll find very clear guidelines of how to navigate the digital world as we grow up without it impacting us the way it does.
Yeah, because I think an awful lot of it is scary. And I'm already seeing with some of my grandkids that Gen Z are, they're finding ways to distance themselves and to acknowledge that not all of this is good, which I find really interesting because they do it better than millennials. Millennials kind of had one foot in each camp, and it depended on where they chose to land, how much of it they find good and how much of it is difficult. I don't think there has ever been a generation that is, I want to say it's almost like they're on rubber bands. They keep going home. Like that's, I didn't see that in generations before me, and certainly not in my generation. Okay, once you left home, that's it. You're on your own. Okay, you're an adult, go do your thing. And even Gen X, to most extent, they've done that as well. There are some that end up having to go home again, but it's not a consideration. As with a lot of millennials, it is for them a big consideration. Right now, trying to buy a house for a millennial is a big deal. Things are not what they once were, and part of their life plans. I hear an awful lot of young men and young women who will, through my 20s, I'll just, when I go to school, when I do whatever, I'm just going to stay at my parents. And I don't think anybody in my age group would have thought that was viable, nor would their parents.
Absolutely. I think
Until your 30s.
one of the things, yes, I think one of the things which are evident at the moment is we're going through a transition period. Things are changing. They're changing fundamentally across the board in so many different areas that it's very hard to keep track of. The effect of all that change collectively is that it increases significantly our perception of uncertainty about the future. And for young people growing up right now, the effect of that is that they tend to sometimes lose hope, and they certainly feel under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. I was reading a study carried out by McKinsey, the McKinsey group, they used 6,500 different respondents from 5 different countries. And they looked at Gen Zers and millennials, and they found that Gen Zers in general face more anxiety, face more stress, are more acutely aware of their need to access wellness. They try to focus on their sleep, they try to focus on their health, and they're relatively young. They're very young. They're at an age where generations before didn't even consider those things because they felt okay. So this kind of self-awareness and the willingness to reach for some kind of solution, I think it's extremely hopeful. It's very encouraging. We're seeing them put in place the defenses, the strategies, the mechanisms that will allow them to navigate successfully in the years to come, a world that right now appears very chaotic. And this is just the beginning for them.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. An awful lot of the Gen Zs, they do consider mental health is not a foreign concept to them. And taking time, yes, getting enough sleep, taking time because you're starting to feel burnt out. And the other thing that I find really fascinating is, I suppose, because of everything else that has gone before, none of them look at career as meaning working in one place, which I find absolutely fascinating. And that brings me to the book. For the young men, okay, there's stuff in here that talks about like harmony and happy hour and all the additional pieces that make for a good life. Never before, like, I find the book really interesting because before, when you got a book that talked about physicality and looking after what was phys ed, and your body, making sure that it functioned at its best and what have you, didn't consider any of what people might consider more esoteric pursuits that really no one used to consider. Your mental health, no one used to consider, are you happy enough? Do you spend enough time every day being grateful for what you have? Do you have a meditation practice? Do you do yoga? Like what do you do to decompress? That all of these things
Mhm.
are a little newfangled, and I love the way it's all there in the book. And as a matter of fact, like on the back, it says stronger, healthier, happier for life. And I think that's such a timely concept to put it all together, because this, funny enough, goes back to SEO. Okay, years ago when we switched from Boolean to contextual search, I got in the habit of talking about everything I did was integrated. It had to be
Mm.
congruent. You had to pull it all together. And by that, I meant also your mental state. And here, the book is addressing all of those things. So it's
When moving forward seems too much, when you feel totally out of touch, hope is seeping out the door. You find yourself curled on the floor. The thoughts swirl round all jumbled and messed. Why is this brain so darkly obsessed? I've secrets I've never confessed. Haven't told a soul I am depressed. A gentle whisper through the pain. Remember, rainbows follow rain. Breathe deeply, hold on tight. Your hope will return, shining bright. Embrace the now, release the past. In forgiveness, peace will last. You matter deeply, you're not alone. Reach out, let your strength be shown. When moving forward seems too much, when you feel totally out of touch, hope is seeping out the door. You find yourself curled on the floor. The thoughts swirl round all jumbled and messed. Why is this brain so darkly obsessed? I've secrets I've never confessed. Haven't told a soul I am depressed. A gentle whisper through the pain. Remember, rainbows follow rain. Breathe deeply, hold on tight. Your hope will return, shining bright. Embrace the now, release the past. In forgiveness, peace will last. You matter deeply, you're not alone. Reach out, let your strength be shown.
optimizing the human.
Pretty much, yes. I love the way you brought it all together. We have talked in the world of business and even in SEO forever about the
Yeah.
who and the why. And we said, if you don't know who you are as a business, there's no chance in hell that you're really going to find your customers, because you don't know how to talk to them, because you don't know what to talk to them really, truly about. And if you don't know who you are, then clearly you don't also know why you're doing what you're doing. And this is so fundamental in everything. It's fundamental in fitness, it's fundamental in mental health, it's fundamental in happiness. We certainly struggle, and this is again going back to the men's health thing, with our identity. We struggle to understand who we are. And when we struggle to understand who we are, we grasp at straws. We try to become what the world expects us to be. We try to be strong, we try to be silent, we try to be successful, we try to appear that, we have this material wealth and cold veneer that we think people expect us to have. And it's killing us. It's too much effort. It's unsustainable. It's fragile. It will break at the first stress test. So really, the answer to most things is to look inside ourselves. And who we are is an evolution. It doesn't stay exactly the same. Parts of it do, but parts of it constantly evolve. And why we do things is also a reflection of that evolutionary arc. But the moment we are in touch with that, then we are okay with the changes. And that gives us grit, that gives us resilience, that allows us to bend and not break, that allows us to navigate difficult situations without falling apart. It allows us to face uncertainty without feeling crippling fear. And it starts so simply by asking ourselves, who am I really, truly? And answering honestly. We can all lie, especially to ourselves.
Yeah.
But the moment we're honest, it's a game changer.
That's so good. It's so good and so true. And in a way, it's funny, but it does all come back to integration. Without the physical piece, without the emotional piece, the mental health piece is never going to be what it should be, and vice versa. Put any one of them at the top, and all the others must come together in a way to allow you to function well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And when you say function well, I mean, what do we mean by that, really? Let's quantify that. We all have X amount of energy in us. That's all it is. And that amount of energy is allocated into things we want to do, things we have to do, and a little bit of energy to deal with the unexpected, which is kind of there all the time. So if we want to function well, truly, and don't have any more energy, this is all we have. And the external world is more and more complex. So let's say part of the unexpected, especially in our times, is going to take more and more and more of our energy. And we can't find anything extra. So the only thing we can do is to lower the daily energetic cost of existing. And the only way we can truly do that is by living our truth, by being us. If you know who you are, you don't have to mentally struggle all the time to understand what is expected of you and how to project it, because you know who you are. If you know why you're doing the things you're doing, well, there's no struggle on why should I do this or why should I do that or how to prioritize these things, because it's already clear to you. And if we take something as mundane as marketing, for instance, well, if you know who you are and why you're doing things, your marketing message is simple. You don't have to have sort of brainstorming sessions and focus groups and different trials and A/B testing, all the nonsense we go through when we're not sure. So let's break it down to the individual. Give yourself the space required to deal with the unexpected without breaking by making life easier for you. Understand who you are, structure your life accordingly. Understand why you're doing those things. Seek the clarity that comes with that. And suddenly some things become easier. Everyday living becomes a little bit easier. I'm not saying it's easy, ever, but it's easier, which means you have margin now to deal with the unexpected. And that's living well. That's what you just said.
it's so true. And by finding out who you are and then living into that, it takes a whole lot less effort than building something that you think you ought to be doing what you think you ought to do and hating every moment of it. Because then when you need some extra moments, you don't have that reserve because you wasted it all trying to be this other thing. And some of us takes a little longer to figure that out. But once you get there, I will say it's pretty cool to know who you are and what you're capable of. And more importantly, celebrate that. Celebrate
Embrace
who
it.
you are. Celebrate knowing who you are. And celebrate the things that you know you do well. Because I've said this forever, every single human on the planet has at least one thing they excel at. And it isn't necessarily what you think. It may not be what you thought you wanted to excel at. But the fact is, there is something that you are the very best at. You know what? Celebrate that.
I'll definitely second that. Absolutely.
Yes. Yay. So in wrapping up our theme here, I hope we did men's mental health some justice here. But what are, let's say, what are 3 things from your book that you think it would be beneficial for men to incorporate into their day? Keeping in mind that and it doesn't have to be mental health, because everything we do that integrates will actually help that.
Definitely. Okay, just 3 things. Okay, let's think about that. The first thing is breathe more deeply. We tend to get stressed. We don't realize we're stressed. We take shallow breaths. A cascade of events happens because of that. Tightness in the chest, less oxygen in the bloodstream, more cortisol in our bloodstream. Cortisol affects us in so many different ways, from shutting down after a certain threshold is reached, the higher analytical centers of the brain, to sort of affecting the body's energy pathway, so we don't access the glucose we do have, and we eat food and we put weight on, and that destroys our image of ourselves and how effective we are, all those things. So all those things can be addressed by just breathing deeply at every situation. It allows us to decompress. It allows us to be aware of our own body. It allows us to feel in control, which is very important. And it allows us to be grounded in the moment because we're taking deep breaths and then slowly exhaling. So if we get into that habit, that's a great thing to do. And certainly when we get into a stressful situation, extra deep breaths absolutely nail it. So that's one good thing to keep in mind. Second thing, socialize. And I don't mean go to parties. Have meaningful relationships with people. Maybe you have 1 or 2 people in your life which you prioritize because their connection with you elevates you and you in turn elevate them. We know from countless studies now that this impacts positively our mental and physical health, to the extent that sometimes it adds up to 5 extra years in our life. That simple thing. Find those people. It's not easy. You have to find a friend. It has to be a meaningful connection. You have to try and raise them when they need raising, listen when they need listening, and also reciprocate that by being open in return. Being vulnerable, again, is not easy. But if you go into that effort, you get rewarded in turn by finding somebody who has your back and you have their back, and you feel way less alone. That's the second thing. So socializing, second thing. And the third thing, fix your sleep. It doesn't matter really, truly, how many hours of sleep you get a night. I mean, it does, but let's say it doesn't, ideally. What does matter is the quality of sleep you get in those hours. So if you manage to get deep, rejuvenating sleep every night, you reset your mind and you reset your body. And that's a good basis to start a new day with. Most of us go to bed, we check our phones, we check our tablets, we think about things, we toss and turn, spend a couple of hours, not sleeping in bed, and then we can't fall asleep and our brain is already agitated. We don't get good quality sleep. Change that pattern. Your phone in bed shouldn't be there. Your tablet in bed shouldn't be there. And I know some people can manage it. So when I say this in a prescriptive way, it impacts on them and they resist it. But a lot of people cannot manage it. So exceptions aside, let's make it a rule. And then those people who can't manage it, well, they can definitely do with his help. And those people who can manage it will not feel severely deprived, I'm sure. So if you do those three things straight from the book, you're going to feel better in your mind, your body, and your emotional and psychological health.
That is so good. And this is something maybe a little different for men. I find that I repeat three, well, one's a gratitude, one's a clearing, and one's a what I aspire to tomorrow. I have three little sentences that I just read through every night before I go to sleep. Now, I am going to confess here. I have my phone by the bed, but not for checking stuff because I didn't have my phone all morning. I was out and realized, oh, my phone must have fallen down between the seats in the car. Like, I don't really care. At night, I use it for meditations because unfortunately, I sleep with, you've probably heard him because you're only half a world away. My husband snores somewhat like a freight train. And I started with earbuds years and years ago, just, like those things that they give you to put in your ears if you're standing in front of a jet plane or something. And it morphed into doing my meditations overnight. And we actually play music for the dogs. It's calming music for the dogs. So that's why those are in there. But yeah, I don't scroll before bed. I don't scroll when I get up in the morning. It's not, it was never my habit. So I didn't allow it to become a habit now. And I think if a lot of people, if you can't do it without scrolling, leave it in the kitchen, leave it in the living room, put it somewhere that you're not going to get that weird fake light in your face while you're trying to sleep, because that's definitely not useful for sure. I have to say that first off, I'm going to do this now. Let me see it without any, oh, there's a ring on there. I'm so sorry. I will add this to the information down below in the transcripts. We'll tell you exactly where you can get David's book, Built to Last: How to Get Stronger, Healthier, and Happier at Every Stage of Life. And I honestly believe that being happier is important. I also believe that to do all of those things, it's our choice. So step up, deep breathing is absolutely super important. Socialize with the right people for the right aim. And the third one was except when you can't, get rid of all those things and get really good sleep. There, I got all three. David, I cannot thank you enough once again
Thank you.
for giving us so much to think about. And we will return with David for sure, because he's always got wonderful things to say. I'll make sure that all of the information you need to get in touch with David is right below, along with the transcript. And I want everyone to pay attention to Men's Mental Health Month and make sure that you try to see and hear the men in your life. Reach out and tell people you're willing to listen. I've actually told my husband and other people in my life, I will duct tape my mouth because I will listen, not talk. Because sometimes that's what people need. They just need your ears, they don't want your mouth. And on that lovely note, thank you again, David. I'm Elaine Lindsay. This is Suicide Zen Forgiveness. Make the very best of your today, every day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
It was
Bye-bye.
wonderful to have you.
Thank you for being here for another inspiring episode of Suicide Zen Forgiveness. We appreciate you tuning in. Please subscribe and download on your favorite service and check out SZF's YouTube channel or Facebook community. If you have the chance to leave a 5-star rating or review, it'd be greatly appreciated. Please refer this to a friend you know who may benefit from the hope and inspiration from our guests. Suicide Zen Forgiveness was brought to you by the following sponsors. Truel Social Media, the digital integration specialists. Let them get you rocking page 1 in the search results. Canada's keynote humorist Judy Croon, motivational speaker, comedian, author, and stand-up coach at Second City. Judy has been involved for over a decade in the City Street Outreach Program in Toronto. Do you have a story to share? Do you know someone you think would be a great guest? Please go to szf42.com. And for our American listeners, that's szf42.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again.